Hi, I'm Bryan Jensen. I'm with the UW Extension's Integrated Pest Management Program, and today we'd like to talk about alfalfa insect pests, and primarily the alfalfa weevil and the potato leafhopper. For current management recommendations, I would suggest you go to a publication we have at the Learning Store titled Pest Management in Wisconsin Field Crops, A3646. We have the URL for you at the bottom. There are a number of other publications on that website, but if you did a search for A3646, that should be your one and only choice. And again, that contains current management recommendations. Let's start out with alfalfa weevil. As far as identification, the larvae, at least the first and second instars, are more of a slate colored. Once they molt a couple times and become third or fourth instars, they're more of a lime green color with a white stripe down their backs as compared to the alfalfa caterpillar, which we'll talk about in another video, will have a white stripe down its side. However, all instars, whether it's first, second, or third and fourth, will always have a black head. The adults, which don't do as much damage, typically at least, will be more of a tan to darker brown color, about 1.25 inches long, and they'll have a little shield on their back. They also, being a weevil, will have a long snout. For alfalfa weevils, there is only one generation per year. The adults become active in early spring, first warm spring days over 50 degrees or so, and they are only a pest in either first crop or very, very early second crop alfalfa. Both adults and larvae can defoliate alfalfa. However, it's usually the larvae that will cause the most economic damage. Here's a picture of a third or fourth instar alfalfa weevil larvae. You can see the lime green color and the white stripe down its back. However, first, second, third, or fourth instars will always have that jet black head right there. As far as damage, early symptoms of larval feeding is what we call shot holing. That's small holes in the leaves, or sometimes feeding from the leaf margin in. So this would be considered early larval feeding. Usually it's found at the tip of the stem. As the larvae grow and we get a few more degree days, the larger they grow, the bigger their appetite is, and they can get to the point where they can skeletonize the leaves. Once they start to finish up, you'll start to see some of the pupae. We kind of call it a naked pupae. It's a white silken pupae, and inside there you can just barely see the pupae itself. And that's important from a management standpoint, because if we're at the economic threshold, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but if we're at that economic threshold and we're starting to see a fair number of pupae out there, that kind of means that the amount of damage that we are likely to experience will be diminishing over time. There's the adult, that kind of tan colored, about 1/4 inch long, and you can pick out that dark brown shield on its wing cover. To scout for the alfalfa weevil, we ask that you walk a W-shaped pattern within the field and randomly pick out a total of about 50 stems from each field. When you have that bouquet of stems, go through each stem individually and keep track of the number with that shot hole feeding that we saw earlier. So keep a running total of the number of stems that has weevil feeding on it, and then divide that number of damaged stems by 50, the total number of stems that you picked, to determine your percent weevil feeding. Now that is not to say that you have a percent defoliation. Rather, it's a percentage of the stems with weevil feeding. The economic threshold is divided between first crop and second crop. In first crop, we suggest you start spraying, or at least consider spraying, when 40% of the stems have some degree of leaf feeding on it. Do not spray if you're within 7 days of cutting. And a further comment on that 40% tip feeding. If it's just the early stages of leaf feeding, a few shot holes here and there, that may not be considered economic. Rather, if it's light feeding, come back in a few days and take a second scouting. What you're trying to do is to buy time. If after that second scouting you're still at that 40% tip feeding and it's light feeding and you're within 7 days of cutting, you might be able to save yourself a spray. In second crop, that threshold goes up just a little bit, and we would consider some management option if you're at 50% tip feeding. I would also suggest that you use a sweep net in that field, and that's only to determine if larvae are present. Okay. Also check for pupae, because if you're picking up a number of pupae and on the leaves, and you can find those pupae on the top of the stem, lower part of the stem, anywhere within that stem, sometimes in the ground. But if you're picking up a number of pupae and also you're not finding that many larvae in the sweep net, that's a sign that that generation is finishing up, and you probably would not pay to spray at that point in time. On those problem fields where you have significant feeding in first crop, I would also suggest you come back and recheck that field within 4 to 5 days after cutting. Examine the crown buds for signs of regrowth or lack of, and continue the stem sampling until weevil activity has stopped. And usually year in, year out, that's going to be they're going to be finishing up feeding when the second crop alfalfa is 8 to 10 inches tall. The reason we want to have you check that regrowth is because both the adults and especially the larvae can feed on the new crown buds. Here's an example of a crown bud. And a little bit of feeding from either, again, the larvae or the adults can go a long way, and it can really slow regrowth of that stand. So again, 4 to 5 days after cutting on the problem fields, come back in and recheck the regrowth to make sure that you're seeing some signs of that field greening up. If it's 4 to 5 days afterwards, you see no signs of that field greening up, that is, no stem crown buds forming or stem buds forming. The stem buds will usually start to form above the crown. If you're not finding that type of green up, and you're finding larvae or adults on the ground, and you will find them during the day under the leaf litter, usually at that junction from the crown to the soil. And so if you're not finding the regrowth and you're finding the larvae, about your only option for control at that point in time is to spray. Okay, now let's move to the potato leafhopper. Potato leafhoppers are without a doubt our most important insect pests that we have on alfalfa in the Midwest. They're a problem from second through fourth cutting, or actually right up until we have had a number of killing frosts in the fall. They're not a pest on first crop because they do not overwinter in Wisconsin, but they migrate up to our state with spring weather fronts. The adults are about 1/8 of an inch long, and they're fluorescent green in color, a very diagnostic fluorescent green, and they're also winged. The nymphs are smaller, and they do not have wings. The real small nymphs are kind of a yellowish color, and the larger nymphs will have that same fluorescent green color as what the adults were. The nymphs are very fast moving. They'll walk sideways as well as they will forward or backwards. And we have a short video to show you that in just a little bit. Okay, there's a close-up of the adult. Again, they're about 1/8 of an inch long. They're winged, and they have that very characteristic fluorescent green color. There's what a number of adults will look like next to a penny to kind of give you a size reference. The nymphs, a close-up, they will be smaller than the adults. When they first hatch, they're going to be about the size of a period in newsprint. Again, the first couple of instars will be kind of a bright yellow color, and once you get to that third and fourth instars, they'll take on that same fluorescent green color as the adults. If you look really close on the nymphs, you will see a wing pad starting to form, but the nymphs are unable to fly. Okay, in this clip we have a video which we would like to show you, and what I would like to have you look at is the nymphs, how active they are and how quickly they will move side to side. It's really important that you be able to identify the nymphs because from a management standpoint, the nymphs can do as much damage as what the adults can. And that movement is very diagnostic of the nymphs. Okay. Now if we can go to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about the biology of the potato leafhopper. As I mentioned, they do not overwinter in Wisconsin, but rather they overwinter in the Gulf states. And they ride our summer storm fronts up to Wisconsin. We never know quite sure whether or not we're going to get the brunt of that migration or just maybe a few here and there. So that's why scouting is so important for potato leafhoppers. The damage symptoms for potato leafhoppers, they have piercing, sucking mouthparts, much like that of a mosquito, and they're extracting plant sap. Collectively, we call that damage hopper burn, and it's important to understand they do not transmit diseases like some of their cousins do in the vegetable crops. Symptoms are first stunting, although that's a really hard symptom to understand and look at in the field, because when you have general leafhopper stunting, whether it's leafhoppers or plant bugs or pea aphids, it's hard to tell on a field-wide basis whether or not you have stunting. The other symptoms you'll see are initially a wedge-shaped lesion at the tip of the leaf. Ultimately, that whole plant may become yellow, and you may have some symptoms of purpling or reddening of the leaves. Collectively, from that damage, you certainly will reduce yield as well as quality. Here's a field shot of some early symptoms of potato leafhopper hopper burn. You can look at some of the leaflets here, and you can kind of see that V-shaped yellowing, which is initial symptoms of potato leafhopper damage. This next slide will show you some extended leafhopper feeding. You'll notice, I think, some shortening of the inner nodes as well as the reddening or purpling of the leaflets. To scout for potato leafhoppers, we suggest that you use an insect sweep net, which is 15 inches in diameter, and go to walk that W-shaped pattern, and in 5 areas along that W-shaped pattern that you walk within that field, take 20 consecutive sweeps at each of those 5 sites. Keep a running total of the number of potato leafhoppers that you find, and pay close attention to new seedings, whether it's a direct seeding or one that's companion seeded with oats or another nurse crop. And especially look for nymphs. As you're sweeping that field, most of the nymphs will get caught right at the collar of the sweep net. The economic threshold for potato leafhopper on established stands, whether it's conventional or glandular haired, is a dynamic threshold. On 3-inch tall alfalfa, we would suggest that you spray at 0.2 leafhoppers per sweep. As that alfalfa grows up to 6 inches, it's 1/2 leafhopper per sweep. At 8 to 11 inch tall alfalfa, it's 1 leafhopper per sweep. And alfalfa that's greater than 12 inches tall is 2 leafhoppers per sweep. That's the end of our alfalfa and potato leafhopper management video. Also available is a video on the occasional insect pests of alfalfa. Thank you.